Greetings, freeloading autodidacts. You're tuned in to Frivolous Gravitas Extras, hosted by myself, Kristopher Driver. As always, we are producing sponsor-free content, so please like, share, and subscribe to show your appreciation for content that doesn't beg you for more money. Introductions aside, let's just dive right in on this episode, because we've done a lot of the opening sort of setup and stuff for like three videos now. Yeah. So if I lose you at all, then yeah, refer back to the beginnings of those videos, and you should probably check those out first anyway, because that's where you get a baseline for what we're going to be doing today. Today, I guess we're going to be talking about like generator functions and classes in JavaScript. For those of you not familiar with programming lingo, a class is just like an object factory, one that creates data objects with similar properties and structures, which can then be classified to help us more readily manage our data that we're collecting or processing in our code. Another way to think of it is like a template. So if you know what the data object you want it to look like, but you don't exactly have all the data yet to put into it, you could just kind of describe it once like a template, and then keep using that template every time you create objects that you want to put data into. And we'll get into that today. I was hoping to get into it in the last episode with the methods, but it's probably best now that I think about it in retrospect to do them separately, because there's a bit more finicky. There's a few ways to do them, and they're all equivalent to the best of my knowledge anyway. And each one of them slightly different with what you can and can't do with them, just lexically, like syntactically, with the way it's written, not the fact that they have different functionality. And I'm sort of practicing this because I only use one method usually. When I'm coding, I'm usually coding JavaScript in React, and I use an IDE too, so I haven't really practiced much doing it differently, so we might see a bit more errors and debugging in this episode than prior ones, but that's good because that's how we learn. So the point of this is simple, but it'll be more clear as we go along. But just to give you a sense of what we're doing with these object factories, we're basically making functions that create objects. A class is just a function that creates an object. You can make a function that just creates objects with a return output. That's perfectly legit. And you can create a function just by assigning a variable name and starting off with class instead of function or arrow function. Just the parentheses and they call it a fat arrow function, but it's just the equal sign with the greater than sign. But yeah, to consider this, let's just say you have a business with a few employees. Each employee has some standard information about them, like age and name, the rate of pay, things like that. So we're going to make a few employees in a few different ways, and we'll build a fake company, like a data object of just a company. And we'll put some employees into that company, and to have employees to put into the company, we're going to make some persons. So we'll use a few separate classes and we'll nest them inside of each other, so you get a better idea of the usefulness or the practicality, as well as the mental gymnastics. And it's the gymnastics that we're generally after in these videos. Well, that's my prerogative anyway. Not prerogative. Motivation. So the point of classes is strictly to keep our data objects uniform, to attach some functionality to them by default. It's to help simplify code. It reuses a lot of code. And you only have to write the structure of the object once, and then you can just call that function. And you don't have to worry so much about typos and stuff either. So if you were manually hard coding in all the data that you got, you might spell name without an E at the end or something like that. And then when you try and run another function that processes, say, all of your persons, and one of them doesn't have a property, it's going to return undefined or throw an error or something like that at you because of the typo. But you can avoid that if you just create everything using a function, because the function's not going to change. It's always going to have the exact same properties attached to every object. So it kind of keeps things uniform. It's also quicker and it's cleaner. So you can see how this would be useful for a business setting, but also for things like organizing components in a web page. You might want all of your navigation or header items all in one class at the top. You might want all of, if you've got like a live feed of like market data or streaming music or podcasts or something like that, you might want that separate so that if any errors occur within that component, at least you don't have to check the entire page. Like you don't have to check the header banner and you don't have to check the navigation. You know specifically your error is coming from this one spot. So that's one reason to use components. Another is frameworks like React or making web apps or mobile apps or anything like that. They use classes in defining the framework. So they don't force you to use them because you can use hooks in React, and those are just functional components. But that just sort of shows more the versatility of the language too, is that you can and don't have to use them at the same time. It's all down to personal preference. But yeah, it's good to note the differences between them because you'll find errors that you weren't expecting a lot of the times. And when you find an error and it's syntax and not your logic, and you're going through your code thinking it's your logic, it's a headache. So we'll try and prevent that by practicing a bit. Yeah, but you can see it would be good for not just like web pages, but like even inventory management or tools that you make for yourself, like making shopping lists or something like that. So we'll lean heavily on our last talk, which was about methods, which are functions that are attached to objects. An object, in this case, I'm talking about either an ordered list, like an array, or an unordered list, like a data object. And again, those terms are really confusing because the language itself, and I don't mean the English language, but the programming language itself defines everything as an object, including functions. But when we refer to data objects, we're referring specifically to a key value pair. So one variable that stores many other items, and how do you find that item within that one variable? You look up the key. Kind of like arrays where you can look up the index of an array, but an array is ordered. Every time you add something to it, it's just numerically and sequential added to the array. But with an object, every time you add something to it or change it, you have to specify the key. And the key is just a name or a label that replaces the index. So the key is literally the index for it. But today, I think we're also going to go into nesting things, because if you're going to put a class inside of another class, you're basically saying there's an object inside of another object. Or you can have an array of objects inside of another object, or an array of arrays inside of another array, which we've also covered a little bit, but we kind of only just touched on it. So we'll go a bit deeper into that to see how it's more useful. And to start, so once again, I'm just going to, oh, that's old. I don't need that. Okay. I'm just going to create a new file like we always do. I'm going to call this one, classes live, I guess, .html. Remember, you got to put the HTML or HTML at the end so that your file extension loads into a browser. I'm going to use Sublime Text, and as always, free to use, download it. It's free, but it'll ask you to pay for it every now and then. It's not obnoxious or obtuse, and that's why I want to promote the developer, because it's a very useful tool. I usually only use it when I'm hand coding stuff. So I don't use it terribly often for work or productivity and whatever, and that's why I never bought it. But it's an excellent tool to have for learning, because hand coding stuff, instead of having an IDE that like finishes words and stuff for you, is more helpful. I thought I desktop active dump classes live. So I'm just opening it a different way than before. It's no different from dragging and dropping. Like we did before, just drag the file into the text editor. But in this case, I am going to boop, boop. And yeah, now I don't need it. And then Control-Shift-I to open up the console. Again, you can just check on here and move it around if you like. Where's my head? My head's annoying last time. It was in the way. I'll leave it there and I'll just move this. Yeah. So, bear with me, I'm just going to make some stuff readable for you. Get you over here. Meh. Okay, now... Oh, yeah, I need my boilerplate. And again, if this is all Greek to you, then just check out the beginning of some past videos, and I think I over-explain it in those videos anyway, so you'll get more information than you ever wanted or needed. But it's just some standard HTML so that we have somewhere to start writing. And I will zoom in to make this easier for you to read. And we'll move this over. Again, this is Chrome browser, whatever, web page. But I've got the console open. And we're just going to check to see that everything's working. So console log testing start of script. Perfect. So line 13 is console logging. That means we've got our script up and running, and we're good to go. Make some room here. Now, I've pre-prepared a little comment here. Maybe I'll add right away just as a form of reference, or a frame of reference, I should say. So feel free to pause and read it. But basically, I'm just going through it to get an idea of what I want to do. So I'm going to have a class that's an object. Inside that company object, I'm going to have, well, I'm also going to have like company name, company inception, maybe year it started, whatever. So these are like properties that are attached to any single company, and then with my function or my class or my factory, in other words, you can create many companies in the exact same way, but I'm only going to create one for this video because I'm going to have a whole bunch of typing to do all the other data. So inside of company, you've got employees, and employees is going to be a list of individual people, and that's what I sort of denoted with this unique person, and then each individual person is going to have other information and methods attached to them that help us show the information that's contained within them, so that you don't have to do the processing on the fly. It sort of sets itself up to have functionality attached to the objects from their creation, their initialization, which is just the whole point of classes, is to do that type of thing, is to have that automated. So yeah, that's our idea. If you want to pause and have a read, I'll leave it on screen for a couple seconds here. But essentially, we're going to walk through it anyway, so you really don't need to study it. Oh, you might want to be able to read this too. There you go. So we'll start with what we want to do. We just want to make a function that creates an object that looks the same every time we create it. And we can do that very simply with the things that we already know. So we'll start with what we already know. I'm just going to make an object the same way I'd make anything, and I'll be expecting some arguments the same way I'll be expecting anything. Let's see if I'll throw color data in there just to spice things up. So all I want it to do is return an object. Remember, these curly braces denote an object. If I just put square braces or brackets, whatever you want to call them, that would return an array. In this case, it would just be empty because I haven't put anything in it, but we're going to fill that with object data. So one of the keys, and again, the order of these doesn't really matter, but neither actually do the quotation marks technically, but I use quotation marks because then you can use these types of objects as data. Like you can export them into other programming languages or other programs, basically. You can even spread them out into Excel spreadsheets, or you can get tree list views of them with some browser extensions for JSON. That's JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. They just call it JSON for short, or most people do anyway. People in the biz. Yeah, so these can be any order you want. I'm just going to do them in logical order because it's easier for my brain to not get distracted by things that are out of place if I just put them where they're supposed to be in my mind. And I'm going to give it a color. So these are just going to be properties of my object. So whenever I put an object in here, or when I use the function to create an object, I'm going to have to give it 4 parameters because that's what it's expecting here. It'll just return undefined if it doesn't have the parameters it needs. But essentially all you're doing is say, hey, whatever I give you, spit it out with these keys so that I can reference it later. And that's essentially no more complicated than that, despite the names and the words being really complicated. I always get confused when I was trying to learn programming because there's so many different terms, and terminology is really hard to memorize and differentiate between things when you're learning a whole bunch of different terms. But yeah, so think of a class as just a function or a template. If you think of the word template, that's probably even more apropos. Oh, I've already got an error. Perfect. Before initialization. I'm not calling it before. Oh, what am I doing here? See, I'm talking and typing, so I gotta make an object. I'm gonna use that function we got, and we'll just use some random values here. 8, and RGB and web design and programming and stuff like that is 3 numbers, 8-bit numbers, so anywhere from 0 to 255, because 8 bits, and 2 to the power of 8 is, 256. So if the index starts at 0, then 255 is the maximum value that you're allowed. So white would be 255, 255, 255, black would be 0, 0, 0, and then the A part of RGBA is alpha, and that's a floating point between 0 and 1. Again, memorization, but if you get it wrong, you can basically look it up in half a second on Google and you'll figure it out right away, because this is all used in CSS. This is constantly used, this type of notation in CSS. But I'll show you that actually. I'm gonna make a style or something like that change, because we haven't done anything visual yet. We've been doing all our code in the console, and that's really boring. So let's get fresh. So as you see, just like arrays, you get this drop-down error when you log out the entire object. And all I did was I made an object, and it said, what are you going to make it out of? And I gave it 4 values. And don't be confused by all of this. See the square brackets? That means that all of this is being passed into the RGBA. So this is actually giving us an array as an output. This is an array. This is a single value. Cool. So that's straightforward. We've done a lot of this already, so shouldn't be any magic or anything to it yet. But let's start with a class then, and see how the class might be a little bit different. So instead of the function keyword, we're going to use the class notation. And just as a convention, you don't have to, but as a convention, I've been doing it so much with React, and I don't really want to train my brain not to do it, because it's helpful in sorting through code to have this type of convention. But when you make a class or some kind of function that creates other objects, like including this one, I should have used a capital here, but the proper way to do it is just to put a capital M so that anybody reading the code knows exactly what it does, like functionality wise. They don't consider it like similar to another function, because this function specifically returns an object, and that's a very specific use case. And just to help sort and debug and read things later, that's how we work it. Now, every class gets a constructor function attached to it. So you can explicitly declare things above it, but to initialize, if you know the values already. But if you don't know the values already, the constructor function will take in, this is where you put in your parameter assignments. And that's what we're going to be using just for the sake of this demonstration here, because this is what's unique to classes, is the this keyword. You really, really don't want to use it anywhere else except for inside of a function that builds an object. And the reason being is because this defaults to like the window object, but if you're in a different application or you're running it through Python or something like that, this will change its value. It's not static. It's very dynamic. So you can assign this to another object or function or anything you want using a method called bind. And I don't mean a method as in a way of going. I mean a function that's tied to objects called bind. You can transfer ownership basically of this, but that's a really complicated and almost deeply philosophical type of discussion that I'm not even qualified to get into. So I strictly only use this keyword inside of functions that create objects, because to me, that's what this is for, literally. So So we'll do like we did before here with an exposition, not exposition, but exposition. And that will be assigned to x, which is this up here. So this could be anything. This is what we're going to be giving it up here. So the first value that you give the function that you're creating is the first assignment to whatever the constructor function's variables are listed up inside of the parentheses there. And since this is actually like a function itself, we can just separate it by lines, as opposed to here we needed the comma, because this is all one big block under the object notation. You need a comma to separate values, just like an array, how you need to separate values in an array when you're declaring them. And when you put them inside of, as arguments inside of functions, you need to separate them by commas. So commas have very specific uses. One point of note and trip up that a lot of people have when they're starting to play around with programming or JavaScript or any language really is figuring out where and when to use the commas. And I know every tutorial video explains it, but they say it once and they expect people to remember. And it took me forever to figure out and remember which places you use it and which places you don't. So in case you're wondering, why do you say that obvious thing so many times over and over again? It's because I struggled with it, and I assume somebody else probably did too, because it's rare to be singled out that way. So I'm just going to finish writing this function the same way we did the last one. What did I call that? Color. RGBA. And again, I can name these anything. I just chose RGBA because it's a reference to something that's familiar to me, but you can name it whatever you want. But just to know, it's an array. So when I use a single, this is just my convention. When I use a single letter as a variable, this again is bad practice, but I do it all the time. I'm thinking of a single value that it's passing in. Whereas if I give it a word, or a lot of the times I'll even start it off with ARR if it's an array, or OBJ if it's an object. And again, it helps me read the code. It doesn't actually do anything different. You just got to make sure this matches this. And I'm going to be using the word this, but forgive me. I don't mean it as the programming this. I just mean it as the this, because I'm pointing and clicking. This function, I'm actually going to give it a method as well, because we're going to be building, well, yeah, I'll give it a method as well, because we're going to be building the employees and the persons and the company and blah blah blah. But I guess I promised we'd do some visual stuff first, so we'll get into the visual aspect of things. So I'm just creating a variable. This is like any other function, but it's tied directly to anything that any object I create using this function is going to have this attached to it. So you call it by using the variable reference for the new object that I create. And then you use change background with the open and closing parentheses to tell the JavaScript compiler that you want to run the code, that you want to execute it. And I'm going to reuse some variables again, and I'm intentionally doing this just to be confusing because I want to help you realize that this is not the same as this or this. So all of this is contained, it's self-contained between these curly braces, just like any function is self-contained between its curly braces. So this part here and this part here are connected because they're all within the same curly braces, but this part here and this part here are separate because they're outside of the scope. And the scope being just everything that's in between these two blocks. And for this scope, it's everything between these two blocks. So inside this block, I'm allowed to declare this variable again and reuse it. But be known, if you didn't use the let declaration like I always do, like I say it's good habit to get into, this is the reason why. Because if I didn't put let in here, this x would start jumping all over the place because it would be a global variable and you'd never really know for sure if it's got the right spot in memory, the right address in memory that it's pulling from to get the desired effect, or if it's artifacting for typing and talking lingo. Oh yeah, I gotta change all these to Y, Z, and RGBA. Well, let's change that to alpha. Why not? just to show that we can use different ones if we want. So remember, this.color is going to be this, and RGBA is the reason why I used 4 things here, 4 letters for the variable, is because we're giving it an array and we're expecting 4 values. This last one here is the alpha, the transparency, or the opacity. All 3 words mean the exact same thing, and again, why programming's hard to learn sometimes, because people use different terminology just based on preference or how they were taught, and that can be really confusing. But I'm going to make a mental note on here too. This is an array. Oh. This value is an array. And oh yeah, we're going to be changing the background. So let's use a template literal for a style, and I will just briefly show you how to use style sheets. This is a terrible way to do it. Again, don't do it in practice, but just the fact that you can do it makes it interesting. So these are those backticks we talked about before, because I'm going to use a string template literal. To get these, you just, what is it? It's just below the escape key on your keyboard. And that way I don't have to concatenate strings using plus, open quotation, close quotation, plus, open quotation, close quotation. In order to use a variable inside of a string, you can use these backticks instead and call variables directly. So anything you put $sign and open closing braces, it's escaping out of the string, and it says, engine, replace this whole block with a variable. In this case, our variable is going to be color vector 0, which in this case would be, if we use the same numbers here, for the white with a 75% opacity, is going to be 255. And that's the R value, the red, green, blue. I used XYZ instead. So I need this comma here is actually part of the string, because remember, anything outside of this $sign curly braces within the backticks is going to resolve as a string when it's done. So point of note, because it's probably going to be hard to see on video here. I'm not sure how clear the videos are actually turning out after the compression and stuff on YouTube. Hopefully they are legible. And I'll use alpha for that one. And this is for style sheets. String template literal. Just for point of reference if you want to look them up later, or you forget what they're called or whatever. I'm just making a note. So I'm going to set this color to equal an array, and inside of that array I'm going to have to evaluate some things, because I want it to change every time. So that means for sure I'm going to have to, wait, I need 4. I'm going to have to bundle some type of, excuse me, I'm going to have to bundle some type of an expression in here. So this can be any type of math. What I'm just saying is whatever the value of x is, in this case it would be 255, divided by 1.5. That way every time I call it, it's gonna change and be visible and obvious. Again, this isn't something you have to do, and it's definitely not good practice. What it is just fun to see what you can and can't do with code, because that's important to know. More so than memorizing how to do things and memorizing patterns is being able to read the code yourself, so that you don't fall into the trap of not being able to debug anything when something goes wrong because you're not used to reading it. So reading funky code is just as important as what do I need? Alpha is a color vector. This value is an array, so that's not what I want in here. Now I need to return something when I change the background. So I'm going to return document. We did this in the last episode, I think. The last video on methods, that is. And all I'm doing is selecting as one word, as a selector. I'm grabbing, as another term, I'm grabbing the tag that's called body. And this method attached to the built-in document object returns an array in case there's more than one tag, because as you can see, I could just as easily type body twice. I mean, again, it's not good practice, and it would probably screw up the page render, but you could put in as many tags as you want. So imagine I'm not looking up a body tag, I'm looking up a script tag, and there's only, there's 10 different scripts or whatever. So it's always going to return an array just in case. And since I know there's only one in my whole page, the first index is going to be the only index. But let's actually be a little cool about it. Just for fun. We'll call it temp fun. So what I'm doing is I'm setting a variable to equal this body tag or whatever it comes back, but remember it's going to come back as an array. So when I return, I'm going to say tempFun.length -1. And the reason why I assigned it to a variable is because otherwise I'd have to type this whole bit twice all over again. So I'd much rather just type tempFun. And that should work just as fine. Hopefully. Now, I need to create an object, so I'm going to make a new variable, and I'm going to use the new keyword, and this is why we can't use the word new on its own as a variable, is because using this tells the engine that you're going to be using a function to create an object. You could say new array, and that's a built-in if you want to create a new object, which we've, I think, did in our functions and methods episodes, one of the two, but in this case, we're going to use the one we just built. So the make class object, and I'm just going to give it some random values, 5, 7. We'll try and give it a color, and that's the opacity. So remember that last argument that we give it is an array, and that's the red, green, blue, and the alpha channel. So this is all one value, all of this. This is its own value, that's its own value, that's its own value, and this is the array. And we're assigning it to whatever our object is that we create. That's what this is. It references, well, the object we haven't created yet, that's what it's referencing. And it's giving that RGBA array into our object creation function. So now when I use class object, I think I should be able to use the change background in here. Oops, syntax error, line 27. Oh, that's right. I did all this wrong. So, again, this is why we're doing it. So we use assignments. We use the colon when we're building objects from scratch, but as I was explaining but not doing, the reason why I use a comma here is because the object notation takes key value pairs, and the colon separates the key value pairs. Whereas in a constructor method, you're building it out of a function. You're building an object out of a function using the variables that you put into the function. So the reason why we're building it this way, again, is to create a template. But because we're not explicitly defining it, saying, hey, the object looks exactly like this, create this, what we're saying is here's a function to create an object. And you use an assignment to do that. You say the X position on whatever object this is, like whatever we create. In this case, class object will replace this. It'll replace this. And it'll replace this. So it'll basically be class object dot Z position, class object dot Y position, etc., etc. I probably should have used different variable names now that I think about it, because these are XYZ coordinates, but they're referencing color, but whatever. Oh, I guess not, because we're using an array for our color anyway, so it doesn't actually do anything, those XYZs. I don't know why I did that. Anyway, equals sign. The reason we don't use commas is because we're using assignments. Equal signs. And again, just like with any object or, well, array or object, you can use that drop-down arrow in your console browser, and that's how you can inspect things and check out what's inside. The neat thing about the console, which I keep bringing up, is it always tells you your prototype here. And the prototype tells you all of the different built-in that you can use. And you can even change or set your prototypes if you really want to get fancy. I don't think we'll even get into that in this series, because that's borderline over my head. Oh yeah, and the other thing I wanted to say was this is the same thing, getting the length -1. So the length on this is 1 because there's only one element in it. 1 minus 1 is 0. That's the exact same thing as saying document thing.0, but I'm just doing things differently to show you the different ways of doing the gymnastics and playing with the code, because knowing the rules is one thing, but bending the rules and bending conventions is an entirely separate thing. But the background's not changing, and that's because I didn't make a function for it to update, in other words. So I have to call it. So class object change background. And what's it doing? It's returning to me I have to put dot style dot background color equals. I have to actually do something with those colors. This dot color, that should work. So every time I call it, it's decreasing this amount here because of this stuff I did in here, which is what I want, but this isn't assigning itself yet to my style sheet, or the style of the style sheets in CSS. Cascading style sheets is just the way of changing the colors and presentation and positions and a whole bunch of fancy stuff, but that's basically just memorizing stuff, and it's really boring. So I might do it just because I need to brush up on it, but I'm not too keen on doing it because it's tedious. So what's this doing? Changing. Oh, that's because, see, I already got ahead of myself. That template literal, that's what we want. We want to throw this RGB-A. We want to throw this into the style of the web page, and that's the whole reason we made it. But then I started talking and got ahead of myself. There we go. So you notice the background changed a little bit, but it's hard to see. So I'm just going to keep calling that method, and you'll notice the background keeps changing. Maybe we can throw another function in there so that it loops over itself. That's probably good practice. Let's call it update color. Function update color, and this is going to take let's just call it color value for now. I'm not sure exactly how, but I will know. I know I'm going to have to do a condition. First, I'm going to have to check if the number's really low, because basically all I want to do is say, okay, once it gets to this, it's not changing very much because I'm dividing it by 1.5 and by 2, right? So every time it runs through, the change is less and less evident. Whereas if I restart it, it's super bright and you can see it darkens immediately, right? So what I want to do is say, like, if the color value that I give it, if that value is less than, say, 20, then set no. Then I want to set, I want to return it, yeah. So I'm just going to return the color value that's already there, but I'm going to add like 200 to it. That way, it'll stay within range, that 255 range, and this is just arbitrary numbers or whatever. But basically what I'm saying is I'm going to call this function every time I run this change background, just to do a check to see that our color value stays above 20, because if it drops below 20, it doesn't change very much and it's hard to tell any difference. So I'm going to return the same value I gave it plus 200, and that should suffice, I'm thinking. Now I'll have to call that somewhere up here. I'll call it just before I change the color. Update color. Now. I should give it an else, because otherwise it's not going to know what to do if it doesn't. So, and this is just to be, clean with the code so that there's always something that this thing returns. Otherwise, when I call it, it's going to be like, what do you want me to do? So yeah, I'm going to call that. I guess I don't need it for the last one. What? Oh no, it's the color. Oh yeah, because I'm assigning the color vector. This is why I'm complicating things for myself intentionally. But I called this X, but it's actually the color value. It's the first index in the array, and the array is red, green, blue, alpha. That's the RGBA, which is the term I used up here for our color. And then we're saying this.color equals our color vector. And then we're saying the first index of our color vector, we're just going to call it X because it's, bouncing around with the code is the whole point to what we're doing here. I could just run this in, we're playing with methods. Might as well play with methods. Let's say I'm going to just run a loop using a built-in for each method. And you'll remember this from our last our last session. We just used a method that loops through everything in the array because color vector is going to be an array, and all I have to do is check to see that it's not the last index in the array if I want to throw a little cheat. So as long as it's less than 3, because our third index here is our alpha. So adding 200 to the alpha when its range is only 0 to 1 is kind of unhelpful. But so as long as it's less than 3, I want to update color, which is the function I just called here, and the color value that I'm going to be giving it, the one that it's going to be checking to see if it's too low, and then to add 200 to if it's not too low. So the only input value I need is v. Well, I guess I can call this val, because like I said, it's really bad practice to only use single letter, unless it's abundantly obvious, like using an iterator. Like for each is an iterator, so it's pretty obvious what it is, but for anybody reading the code like you guys out there, might be harder to understand if I don't use at least 3 characters. So essentially what it's going to do is just going to grab this color, which is our red, green, blue array, or whatever up here. We're only going to use the 0, the 1, and the 2 index, because that's red, green, blue, which we also named XYZ. So I could have thrown this any number of different ways, but the way we're doing it is just to practice. And then every time this change background, it'll do that evaluation check to see if any of our numbers are getting too small, that the changes are hard to see. And actually, let's throw another one in there, math.round, so that we don't get all these trailing floating points and stuff over there. That should work. And then we run our check, Control S to save, Control R, uncaught reference error, color vector is not defined. Color vector is this. Oh, capital V, regular V. There we go. So now when I run class object.changeBackground, which is our method that we built into our class here, you notice every time I do it, oh, why is that happening? I thought we used math.round. It should be returning, oh, right, because it's doing the math in here. It's just doing the check in there. So that's a bad place to put it. Error. Let's try that again. Math. Actually, if we're in here, we're going to get creative, and we're going to be playing with functions. Let's make a round function. So return whatever you give me, but just return math.round x. And then up here, since I've already got these parentheses open, I can just throw my function call in front of it, which is handy dandy. Round. Yeah. There you go. Cool. Yeah, it's working. Cool. Yeah, so that was a really long way around the park, but we got there. So let's look at another way of making objects. Let's do that structure I was talking about before. Maybe I'm gonna have to do some typing, so instead of being all crooked to the microphone, I'm gonna sit upright so you don't have to spend a year watching me type slowly from the side. So I'm going to create a class of person, and it's the same as the other one I'm doing before, where I'm going to use a constructor function. And just as a mental note for myself, I'm going to use equal signs. Persons have first name, yeah, so I'll call it first name. This L name. What else do I want? Oh, we'll do the old age, sex, location thing. Oops, no spaces. If you chat rooms back in the 90s, early 2000s, you'll be familiar with all this. But the ASL. Let's do location. So I'll call this one location. Let's do these ones properly because it may start getting complicated. So I'm going to use proper variables for these just so I don't get myself mixed up. First name and last name. Now remember, these variables can be whatever I want, but on this side, everything attached to that's going to be the object that I create. So fname is going to be the name of the property I'm attaching to the object that I create. Whereas on this side, I'm assigning it the parameters, or in other words, the arguments that I'm putting into the function call when I'm creating a person. So inside the constructor parentheses here, those have to match what you're getting, and they also have to be in order. So when I call new, like this up here where I say make class object, the order of these does matter because the first one in here is going to be assigned to whatever the first variable is in your constructor function. But that's the same as all functions, but it's just important to reiterate because it can get confusing, like I said, when you start using words and making practical applications for things. It quickly gets confusing because people are imperfect and people choose bad variable names, especially when you're trying to figure out the logic at the same time as you're writing. Or if you're recording a video and trying to speak at the same time as you're writing, I guess that's much the same. So with classes, one of the ways that they're different from just explicitly calling, like if I wanted to like const make another object, I could just as easily make an object like this with an arrow function and then have that return an object, because remember, arrow functions automatically return whatever you put in them, so I don't need to, but I could. I don't need to write the return statement. And then I could say fname, first name, and then I could put first name up here so that, you know, when I call make another object, which I would do going like this, and then whatever I put in here, the first thing I put in here, that string, that blob of text, whatever I put inside these, before I put another comma in, that whole chunk is going to be considered a value. So this will work out the same as this, but where it's different is if I want to start creating, because I'm writing it explicitly in this case, I could make a method just as easily as that and write, oops, dropping pens, and write an anonymous function that basically does the same thing as figuring out like fname plus lname, because we're going to add the first and last names together. That'll probably be the first thing I do. So that'll be pretty much the same thing. But what I want to show you is classes because they're slightly different. And in classes, if you want to compute a value while you're creating this thing, you first have to initialize it with the values that you know. So anything that's consistent, so like this, if you wanted to say like this dot type, like what type of object is this, just for anybody who's looking it up, and you could just call it person's object. So this value would be assigned to absolutely everything that you create with this new person. In this case, it'll say person class because we called it new make class object because that was the class that we created up here. But in this case, we could say new person. And in order to compute a value that we don't know yet, because it's based on incoming values from when the class function is being called, you have to use a getter and a setter. And that's what's kind of weird about classes that I always have to practice, because you're basically creating a method and then you're creating a property that equals the output of the method. But you have to do them in like specific order, because if you try and put this up here above the constructor, it hasn't built the object yet. That's why this built-in function called constructor is specific to classes, and that's why classes are specific to these get function. And for some people it's more readable, and for some applications and frameworks they actually repurpose, because remember I said with the prototypes you can repurpose you could repurpose the language to do whatever you want. You could rewrite the prototypes if you really wanted to so that it has own property. You know, it already has a function built in, but you could change that to whatever you want. It's just really complicated when you do that. Nobody else can basically use your code because you'll break something in their code if they try and add it to their existing code base. So it's impractical in most cases, but if you run into a bug or there's a security vulnerability and you don't want to like change over your entire code base, which can be really expensive and time consuming, or if you just need a quick fix while you're doing all those changes, you can change a prototype oftentimes and that'll get you by in the meantime. So it's good to know that option's available at least. But other than that, I'm going to need to put in all this other stuff. So I'll need age, I'll need sex, and I'll need location. And remember, these match these. Use an assignment when you're inside a function for a constructor using the this, because you're assigning things as you're building the objects, whereas if you're just explicitly declaring the object, you're telling it what it's going to look like in the end. You're telling it just return this every time. This function just returns this every time, no different. This will do it the same way with a class. Maybe I'll separate these. Oops. Our example starts here, because that other stuff is just sort of like a precursor to this. So return full, this getter function is going to, so the get keyword is going to basically give full name its own spot down here, as if I was saying this dot full name. But the issue is I can't use any of these other values inside of the constructor function because it hasn't been built yet. You're giving it the instructions to build the object, but until this curly brace is closed and says that's everything that we're initializing to begin with, just to start, it's got no references, so you can't say this dot f name, right? So instead of doing that, what we're going to do is make a function that calls a method. So I need a method, and this will be my compute name method. And then I have to define it. So compute name, you have to spell it right. And that's just a method like any other method, but I'm going to have that return, oh no, I don't need any inputs because I have the inputs already. Fname plus, I don't want a space in there. So this is what I was mentioning before about concatenating. I could use a string literal, or a string template literal, like I did up here with the backticks, but that's actually harder for me to type because I can't just type words. So I usually just concatenate, even though it's ugly and bad practice. We're just trying to type faster, that's all. Let's make another one, because I want to print some info. So maybe I'll say like an info function. But that's a getter, so my getter is going to have to return this dot, and that's the thing. See, the method is attached to the object, so you definitely need the this to call the method, which this is. The reason I don't need to write function here is because we're still in this class making this template maker, this object maker that we've got. So that that already defines that we're inside of a function, and for specifically just classes, not for anything else, but for classes, the way to write methods attached to an object that you're creating is, I'd like to say it's simplified, but every time they update the language, and this language has been, 1980s probably, the 90s, it's one of the first scripting languages for the web. But it's been used in everything from Flash. They had their own version called ActionScript. Right now they've got like a stricter version called TypeScript, but it's got like a whole system of types of data. But yeah, anyway, there's a whole way to get down into the weeds with that. But what I'm doing here is I'm creating it's like a pseudo method. But I don't need the word function because I'm already inside of class, and that's a class-specific JavaScript type of thing, where you don't need to write function in the case of writing a function for an object that you're building, because it's implied that it's a method. Without the get, it's just going to assume it's a method because that's what you do inside of classes. You build methods after you've built the constructor. Constructor is technically just a method that's called when you initialize the object for the first time. You initialize the object the first time by using that new keyword. So, get info, I'm just going to have to call a method, which I haven't made yet, but I'm going to make it right away before I forget, because that's what I tend to do. I also use spaces here to sort of lump things together often to help me visually read it. Best practice, probably put some kind of comment to explain functionality, but I'm not interested. I'm just gonna keep going with what we got so that we can get through it, because succinct is not my forte, despite my best efforts. And I'm breaking this array down. Like, I just want to return an array of all the information I have in here. There's a bunch of different ways you can do this. I could return an object if I wanted. I could return a bunch of console logs. I could return a function that returns a function that returns a function that returns it all. I think we've done that to death though, so I'll start making the stuff we know more simplified and ready, but I'll show you some new notation. So breaking this up, again, JavaScript's flexible in the sense that it doesn't read spaces except for if you put it like a space inside of something that it's trying to read. But if you have extra spaces at the end, it'll generally just ignore it and not care. But the thing is, it only generally ignores it, so you still have to kind of pay attention. It's just a little bit forgiving if you forget or whatever. So whatever this print info is called, and I call it while I'm building my class object, because the get keyword tells it that I want to assign another property, and that property value in this case is going to be an array. And I'm just breaking it down into lines like this so it's easier to read, not because it changes anything or has to do anything, but just important to note that the commas are still necessary because it's no different from writing an inline. It's the same thing. Now, that's part of that, and that's my method. I actually, in my real world code, I even do this, like at the end of every and getter, etc. Getter, just to help me see without having to check, and look, like have your eyes darting all over the page trying to look for things. I just make a note here so that I can keep focusing on the code that I'm writing without having to jump around as much as possible, because I get distracted very easily, as you can imagine. So what else do I have here? I think that's good enough for just a person. We might as well start creating people. And this should look familiar because I'm not going to mix these up. I'll keep using let. And again, when we create objects from a factory or from a class, generally use a capital letter for your variable. Don't have to. Could be absolutely anything you do, but it just helps you visually see, like at a glance, as soon as you're looking at your code, if you're expecting a string or something and you see a capital letter as a variable, you'd be like, that's not a string. I'm supposed to use like that variable dot something if I'm trying to pluck a string out of it. So just mental tricks like that are helpful, but it's also good practice just to get used to seeing it done properly. But again, it's also good practice to see things differently so that you can read bad code too, because it doesn't help you if you only see perfect code and nobody's code is perfect. It's going to be really hard to reason through the code and find mistakes or errors or bugs or things like that, because you're just not used to seeing it written differently. And everybody's going to write their code differently because there's so many different ways to do things. That's why they call it a language. It's like anything you want to say, you can say it differently. And by saying things differently, it doesn't mean that you have different information. It just means the presentation is different. So writing code and programming is a language in the sense that you can do the same things in many different ways, and most of it comes down to preference. But just like with language and English and stuff, there is a way to be a good teacher and a terrible teacher. You can explain things really well and you can explain things poorly, even though you both have access to the same words and the same vocabulary. It's the structure and organization and putting it together and the logic, but mostly for yourself, it's a way of visualizing code without having to keep saving it and checking that it works, like we keep doing. So what do I got? A syntax error on line 66. That is way up here. This dot type. Oh, it doesn't like that. Let's look up some documentation here. So, JavaScript class function. I thought I was allowed to put stuff up there. So we check the documentation. That's the other way of writing it, by the way. Just assigning a variable. They use the same practice as me with the capital for the variable name. And then instead of writing function here or using an arrow function, you just use the keyword class. So maybe I'll skip that one because it's not much different than the others. But why isn't it letting me assign a type above? I thought I was allowed to do that. Ooh, generators. We should do a generator too, actually. I'm glad I went here. Here we go. Oh, that's the this binding. Constructor. Here we go. So public field declarations. With JavaScript field declaration syntax, the above example can be written as, right, and then before their constructor, oh, they just put height. There's no this. So inside the constructor, you need a this, but outside of the constructor, you just put type. And since it's a key that you're assigning to an object, I'm guessing, but since it's a key that you're assigning to an object, you don't need to use the variable declaration let, like I do everywhere else. It's assumed to be part of the class because it's written in the class. I suppose. Oh, and then there's private field declarations. Yeah, so if you need some piece of information, but you want to hide it from the final output, but you need it inside to just do some computation or something like that, just know that the option is there. I don't know how my face changed and moved here. What's going on? Actually, I guess I don't really need that. Yeah, so that'll be more helpful. Using the hashtag, I'm not going to get into private because I literally don't understand any of that. We might get into this actually, because once I create a subclass of a class, you see dog is a type of animal, and animal has its own class and constructor. That's very similar to having a company that has employees, that has people in it. So we'll probably use this extends later on. But anyway, back to our stuff. And I didn't save this yet. Save. There we go, now our script works again. Let's see if that changed background. Okay, good. And notice how it's rounding out our numbers too, because we wrote that ridiculous function. We could have just put it in line, but yeah, this, totally useless. It does its job, so I guess it's not technically useless. But anyway, I am console logging out myself, and as you can see, you can use this type of key notation, or you can just simply use the dot notation. Chris.age is the exact same thing. Say 35 and 35. So what it's doing is it's assigning a variable and it's generating an object, and then it says, well, how do I build this object? And it says, this is how you build the object. And then it says, well, I need this type of all these informations in order to do to do the building process that you mentioned. Yeah, I wonder, actually I should check that type thing. Type? Person's object, cool. So yeah, so it's asking, I'm going to need some information in order to build this object for you, and then you say, haha, well, I provided it for you. It's separated by commas in the order that you asked for, no problems. Diff. And that's pretty much all there is to a basic constructor. Just for the sake of, what do you call that? Thoroughness, just for the sake of thoroughness. And I'm just going to copy and paste all this. Copy. Paste. 2. Paste. 3. Paste. 4. And again, the same way, I'm going to use the built-in array constructor, because notice we didn't define or declare this as anything, but I'm going to use the array constructor, and I'll just use a couple of these. Doobie-doop. Copy. Paste. And so on. Dot, dot, dot. So we can create an array that is just an array as well. And I just want to really make it clear that these types of patterns, the way that you put stuff inside of parentheses and put brackets inside of parentheses or brackets inside of objects, that can just nest infinitely. That's entirely up to you. Whatever your code needs or requires, that's what you do. And if you've got some performance issues, you can debug it after and start spacing things out. But the point is, it's all within your own control. So it's not something that you have to do one way or another. Like, there's no rule to it. The rules are just the syntax, and then it says you got to put something in here. You can put whatever you want in there. You can put a function in there if you really want to. Oops. Now I'm messing everything up. And you could have that function just return a string, and it'll all do the same thing, because what it's doing is it's saying this block of code, this is an object, it's a function, and functions in JavaScript are objects, and it's just saying, give me either a string, a number, a floating point, a boolean, whatever data type we have available to you, give us that. And where did I put that, Chris? Yeah, so... Oh, I stopped console logging it. So first name returns Chris. It's just a function now, but it'll work just as well if I call it person fname is what I called it. And la-di-da. Line 96 returns Chris. So again, that's really pointless. I'm just going to leave it to what it was before. But the point is, the flexibility with programming is all with your mind. If you can learn to read code as blocks of objects like that, and just say, okay, a function needs this. This needs to be this. A comma needs to separate our values. Like that type of thinking. And if you get used to looking at brackets and say, okay, that's all one item. It's all one array. All of this here. When we console log that out, you'll see index 0 for the array that we're console logging out. In this case, it's the second one, because I've used a comma for the two objects that we've created here. The D only has one element in it, but inside of that element, it has 4 elements, the length of 4. And you'll see every object has length. And within that, they also have all their own prototypes and yada, yada, yada. Okay. So let's get into something a little bit more technical now. I guess, one last thing. So, array blank length, we'll call it. One useful function let's see, I'm mixing up words and stuff. One useful use case of using the new keyword in creating objects is that you can define its length explicitly, and even though that'll be an empty object, that can sometimes be handy if you know exactly if you want to reserve a spot in memory so that everything's side by side for performance issues, or it's sort of an old way of doing it. Most people don't use it at all because you can dynamically change your arrays. You can make them bigger or smaller, so it doesn't really matter. But it's nice if you're not sure where there's a problem and you do have an issue with like a missing index or something like that. This might help you figure it out using a bunch of console logs and other tools and things like that. But just so you know, it's available to you. It's only a JavaScript. Well, no, that's not true. This syntax is only available using the new keyword, though. You can't say let a and then just use 26 inside of the brackets, right? It'll create an array, but it'll give you one index, and that one index value is going to be 26. So that's not the same thing. But you can just leave your brackets empty, like we've done a ton of times before, just to denote an empty array, because the brackets themselves say new array. But there is some subtle technical difference, but yeah, I don't think we need to get into that. So before we get into the complicated ones, maybe we'll just get used to the syntax with something a little bit more simple so that we can practice some methods inside of our arrays. So we'll make a classroom and we'll put people inside of our classrooms first. So constructor function, we're going to have this subject, the subject name, and then we're going to need students, and that's going to be, well, we'll just leave it an empty array for now. Let's do the quick and dirty. This is kind of how you'd normally write classes, not knowing exactly how they're going to be built. You just build one piece at a time, knowing exactly how you're going to finish things is... no, I'll do that later. You don't necessarily know how you're going to finish. You can just start with the words and explaining it in English, and then after you explain it, you can break the problem down into manageable parts. So if you know what you want it to do, but you don't know how to write the code, start off with, okay, I'm definitely going to want to be able to add students, and I'm definitely going to be on a, let's call that student. And I'm definitely going to be want to be able to remove students from a class. So if they're bad, really disruptive, anything like that. Or if they just drop out or whatever. Let's create some persons so that we can stick people in our classes. Actually, I don't want to type all this out. And I had already made an example because I knew I wasn't going to want to type all that out. So cheers to forethought. I'm trying to take the name Karen back because that shouldn't be a slur. We shouldn't be using Karen as a... Anyway, that's my socially conscious, socially aware statement of the day. So now, basically what I want to do is create a class. Oh, this is really bad. Because I'm reusing the word class as part of the name, and it's confusing. Not that you can't do it, it's just kind of confusing. But it won't matter though, because I'm going to create an object for the class, and that object I can just name it properly. So I'll call it social studies, and then we'll never have to look at the word class after that. So social studies is going to be a new classroom, and then I told it I was going to give it a, sorry, this stuff is in my way. Oops. Not that it's in my way, but it's distracting me. So there we go. Now it's out of my way. Social studies is going to be a new classroom. A new classroom needs a name, and that's the only thing I give it. So my constructor is going to be expecting something, which means I got to give it something, and I'm going to give it social studies. Now, how do I add a student? So I'm going to create a method here called add student, then I drop a student in. A student is going to be one of these people. So I'm going to have to check to see if the student's already... Yeah, so students is an array, so I can use array methods on it. And that's where I'm going to use my if check. If this dot students dot includes person, I'm going to want it to return just the console log to see if it works. That student is already in this classroom. And I guess similar to that, since I'm already doing this, I can say if this dot students dot includes person. Oh no, outside of there. Return, or here's a little bit of syntax for you. So anything with the exclamation point in front of it, if it's a true false statement that you're asking for, so every time there's an if statement, it's either true or false that comes back, right? So if you just use an exclamation point, it says whatever the thing is, the opposite of that. It's like doing a bit flip. It's just negation, basically. So if this is true and this is in front of it, then I'm looking for the false of this. It's a shorthand. You could also say if students.person equals or false or something like that. You could do it the long-winded way, but the short and quick, dirty way, we're going to start practicing, because we've done the long way to death now, and I think we're all pretty good at that. So now I'm just going to say not. If that person is not included, you're going to console log can't remove. Oops. See, notice this is why the text editors help. I tried to use an apostrophe and using single quotes. You can't define a string with single quotes if you're using an apostrophe, because it'll just end the string at the apostrophe. So in these cases, another source of many, many, many bugs is the apostrophe and string thing. What was I saying? Can't remove that student. They are not in the class. Okay, so basically I just took this because I spent a few seconds figuring out this logic, and I knew I was going to have to use it again, so I just figured it out on this while it was still fresh in my memory. Now, if this condition, if the array of students that's inside my class, if that student's anything other than this, meaning if they're not in the list, because that's the only other option, I'm going to have that return this.students.push, and then I'm going to push on the student, and that's this here. So person should be student. And now when I call this method from any object I create out of a classroom, in this case social studies is the classroom I'm going to build, it's going to attach this template to anything that you apply new classroom to. And so now we can basically in our minds replace this name with social studies. So if inside of social studies I have an array that has students, and students includes the student that I'm trying to add, then just console log, we don't need the, we do so many logs, let's do a console.error. Same thing, different pile, just showing you stuff. But if that student is not in that list, we want to add them to the list, so we say this.students.push, and then we add the student that we give it. So this should basically be the opposite, but to remove somebody, I'm going to have to find out where they are in that array. That'll be good practice. So else. In this case, because I'm saying the not, right? So if this student includes student, which is the value that we give it when we say, hey, remove this student, but if the student's in that class, classroom, I should say, in that course, and I try to remove them, that will work. But I want to report this console error. I can't remove them if they're not included in this array, this.students. Yeah, that'll work. So for this, I can't just return it because I actually need to do some thinking. Okay, so I need the index of that student in the array. So let index equal this.student dot splice. So I'm going to use another method on here, and it's basically just going to cut everything. Yeah, so no, that's not going to work. Well, let's try our add student first. So let's just return true for now, just so it doesn't bug out. I want to test this thing out. So now that we've got a class, we'll say social studies dot add student, and we've got some students created because I just copy and pasted them here. So I'm going to add a student, Janice, and then I'm going to console.log our social studies object. Well, we don't need the whole object. Let's just look at the students. Save. So we only get one person because we only added one. So our add function actually worked. That's good. We've got all the data inside of our person object, including, as you can see, we can evaluate the full name because we use that, where's that? Get full name. So we've created a property, even though we didn't list it up here, we created a property called full name. And all it did was call its own method, and then the method we just put right after that was just the first and the last name with a space in between. And all of this together is just a string. And a string is any line of text. Yeah, we already went over that. So now what happens if I try to... I have to get the index of that person. So I basically want to call index of first off. So let idx equal this.students.index of, and then I'm going to drop in student. So when I pass in somebody I know is already in there, I want it to give me the index of that and then keep that index in here. So now when I say this.students. Or no, not dot. I just need to use that index. That's the one I'm going to remove. And that's why I need Splice, because Splice, let's go to our documentation here. JavaScript Splice method. So the documentation tells us the splice method changes the contents of the array by removing or replacing existing elements and or adding new elements in place. To access part of the array without modifying it, see slice. So SLICE is different from splice, SPLICE. I get those two confused all the time. So let's see how they used it. They got months in an array. They splice out inserts at index 1. Replaces one element at index 4. So I want to remove an element. So I would leave the third thing blank. Index is the first argument, and one element is what I want to remove. So just from looking at this example, without having to read the documentation and try to figure out how to understand all of that, I find it really helpful to just look at the examples and then look at the comments that they place after the examples, and then I can get the functionality that I'm looking for. This isn't a good way of studying, it's just a good way of practicing. So if you want to practice using new methods, check the documentation. So every time I say check the reference, check the documentation, MDN, W3 schools, random YouTubers. If it works, it works. It doesn't matter where you find it. But best not to look for solutions to things that you haven't tried building. Try building it yourself first and look for methods that'll help you build the solutions to your problems. So in this case, I want to take the array of students, no matter how many students there are in it. Whatever student I pass in to remove, first I'm going to check if they're in that array already, because if they're not in the array, then there's nothing to remove, right? We can just kick out of our function right away with an error. An error in this case. You don't actually have to error, you could just log. But in the instance where the student that you pass in is already in there, I need to find out what index they are in in our classroom students array object. So I get the index by just setting a variable and then calling the index of. So I guess I can look that one up too. So it's an array prototype. It's built into all arrays. You can always check the index of and then pass in there the value that you're looking for, and it'll spit back out what index it finds first. It won't give you all of them, I don't think. It only returns the first one, and it returns false or -1 if not found. Following uses of index of, finding all the occurrences of an element. Oh yeah, see, if you wanted to find all of the occurrences, you'd have to create an array for your outputs. So that's more work than we need to do for this this case example. So I'm just going to leave this as is, and I think that should work, but I'm going to have to save, refresh. Now I've got my social studies object. Where is that? Social studies, add student, and then I console log students. I don't want to just, I'm going to get the whole object so I know what I'm looking at. Now the students object inside of the social studies class is, it's got one element in it, which is index 0. So now if I take social studies dot remove students, and it auto-populates because it knows that it has that that method built in because, you know, we named it. And I'm just going to throw Janice back in there. And then I just need to see my social studies object again. And if I check the students, they should be empty. Yeah, there you go. So it worked. So this .students.splice, it takes the index, and I had to look up the index first, and I had to pass in this to find out which index of the array to track, and then I use that index to remove one element and replace it with, see, if I replace it with this, I'm just gonna, copy, paste. I'm just going to do a quick example here so I don't have to type it all out again. In the console direct, social studies, save. Type error. Remove student is not a function. S. See how it replaced the empty array, which used to have Janice in it. But I called the remove students and took Janice out. So just some food for thought. Well, I guess I could leave that and I'll just comment all this out. And I'm sort of polluting my comment section here. So I'm going to get rid of some of this just so that it's easier to see, because we're going to get bogged down with a whole bunch of details soon, because we're going to start getting into all this. Where is that? Line 23 and line 99. Line 99. Why is there a console log on line 99? Didn't save it yet. There we go. Happens to the best of us, kids. Happens to the best of us. So what else can I do with that method though? Because we've already got the social studies object. We might as well just see some other things that we can do. So I can like add students works if I throw in Chris or Karen or anything like that, but it won't work if I start listing them off like this because we didn't account for that. Remember before we got the arguments keyword object and we created an array out of it. That way we can give infinitely many arguments into the function that we're creating, but in this case we only expecting one. So I don't think we need to redo that though, because I've done a lot of that. So maybe let's start with like filtering. So I will add some students here. I'm gonna add the ones that we've got. So Janice, Oops. Copy, paste, 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 paste. So Chris, who's our other people? We've got Jordan and we've got Karen. Hello, Karen. Now another way we could do this too is like, you don't have to just do it the nice and proper way. As I keep saying, you can bend the language a lot, and basically all it's saying is give me one thing in here. But that doesn't mean just one word or one simple... You can give it the same function that you created a person with, and you can make a new person just as easily. And remember, person takes its own first name, last name, and then ASL, age, sex, and location. So I'm going to compliment Megan a little bit. A little bit. I'll say she's 18. Hi, Megan. If you're watching this. And she's from outer space. So this person is always going to be, this class is like a template of an object, and it's always going to take in the same number of variables because they use that to build whatever class or template or object that you're trying to build. So the whole point of using classes is to design the class. But when you're calling functions and methods, like all of this is just one expression. It's one single object that comes out of it. Same with this, even though it looks shorter and more concise. So we can add a student while creating a student. It's bad practice just because it's harder to read. If you've got like 5 operations hanging in one single line of code, it's harder to read. But the benefit to it is once you've written all your code and you've got the logic and everything running smoothly, you can summarize a whole bunch of lines like this by in JavaScript, because it's so flexible, by putting everything in line, and you can curry things together. And with CPUs these days, they can hold huge amounts of instructions in a single set. So rather than having to like check all over the place, one place in RAM, one place in level 1 cache, one place in level 3 cache to find all the bits and pieces, if you write them entirely in line, a lot of the time the processors, if you're doing like hundreds of thousands or millions of operations, it'll run them significantly faster inline because it'll store it as one single instruction, even though you're doing 15, 16 different things inside of it. So it's just useful to note that it's not impractical, even though it's messy and it's harder to read. It's very common in the wild that you'll actually see people writing a lot of inline code like that, if nothing else than to speed up the system's operating. So I'm just going to remove Karen. And let's make a list women. So to do that, I'm going to use the filter method. And again, it's students where we're storing, students is where we're storing everything. So the dot notation gets you deeper and deeper into the nested object that you're looking at. In this case, students is an array, so we can use the filter method on the array. And inside of filter, it takes a function, and whatever comes back as true, like it'll go through every element in the array, no matter how long it is, you can use filter on it. And it takes let's just use a regular function. I keep using arrow functions, and I keep wanting to show you guys that it can take any type of function, even though there's several ways of writing functions. You can even define it up here and then just pass in the variable that you've defined as a function, but maybe I'll do that for next time. And again, because of scopes and enclosure, I can reuse this student's variable, and it's not the same as this one, because this one is completely self-contained in the class. All it's doing is it's representing whatever you pass in, which in this case is to add student, is the variable of a person, which is an object created by our person's object creator, our person factory. But in this case, I'm going to filter out through the students based on, let's do this one inline. So like if, and then I need opening and closing braces. If student is age greater than 30. Return true. Yeah, so that'll work, but we can shorten things up a little bit here with our shorthand notation. And actually, I will use an arrow function, because in this case, because arrow functions always return true, I'm going to use a short arrow function. So function student, I don't need any of that. I just need student, oops, in here. And that's where I gotta put my arrow function. Sorry for all the back and forth here, but this is just how I write code. Okay, so arrow function of student, and I only got one input value, so I don't need those parentheses. And I'm gonna say if student age is greater than 30, return true. Yeah. Oh, there must be a shorter way. I'm like, yeah, I know the shorter way. Let me just try that. I'm going to use the inline. So the question mark's basically going to say anything in the parentheses before the question mark should be a true or false statement. The first value that you give after that is true, separated by a colon. And again, not to be confused with the object notation, this colon is different, but I guess since I got all that stuff away, yeah. So in this case, I'm not using the colon as an object notation. This is another one of those upgraded JavaScript things that just came from time. More recently in ECMAScript 6 standard or 5. Actually, it might even be older than that. But basically what it's doing is it's just checking a true or false, and then with the question mark after it, it just says if one side is true, then then assign the value to this, and if the other side is true, assign the value of that. And because this is an arrow function, and because this is an inline if, I'm thinking I don't need to type the word return, because return should be implied. But I'm going to have to check. That's part of the fun in what we're doing here. So I need to close this because that wraps my filter method. So that's what that one's for. So what I'm doing is I'm calling my class object, looking for the student's property inside of my class object, knowing that it's an array, and it's always going to be an array because I created it with a class function, and I defined it as being an array. So every time I create a class, it's always going to be value of array, and this is why it's useful, is because now I can be sure that I can use the filter method, which is built into all arrays, to run a comparison check and return to me a list, which I'm assigning to this new variable. So I should be able to just console log list women, and, or not women, I should say like gender, sex, that would make more sense. If the sex equals female, that makes more sense. Student sex. And person has this dot sex, so yeah, that should work. Sorry, realistically, I could just run this and see if it works, but I like trying to figure out to try and be sure of it first, and then I get really surprised when I'm wrong, and that's what helps me remember. So, oh, and the double equal sign means it's evaluating a true or false, as opposed to a single equal sign that is assigning a value to another thing. So if I want to say A equals B, because every time I say A, I want the answer or the value of B to get spit out, use a single equals. But if you want to check to see if something is compared to something else, using the single equals would throw an error, because it's thinking that you're trying to assign something in a place you're not allowed to assign something. There's also a triple equals, which I sort of glossed over in a methods video, but that's comparing the value and the type and the instance in memory. So it's a bit more complicated. Maybe we'll cover that when we talk about like the this and the philosophy of JavaScript programming language. Uncop type error. Social studies add students is not a function. Did I not put an S on there? I didn't. See, I got them all backwards. Remove student is not a function. add students, remove students, remove students. It should just be one actually, because remember, I'm not allowed to give it a whole bunch of different ones. So I'm going to change all these just for posterity's sake, because I will definitely forget to do it later. Remove, remove. So now they're all consistent at least. Save, refresh. Would you look at that? Our function worked. Bravo. So we've got Megan, who is of sex female, and we have Janice, who is of sex female, but we do not have Karen because we removed Karen. Karen was kicked out of class or dropped out. We don't want to make any false assumptions on this channel. But yeah, so you sort of get the idea of what we're doing with the methods and why we'd want those attached to every single one of our objects. Because as you'll know, if you make, a school that offers 500 classes like history and English lit and Arabic, whatever you want to learn, they're all going to have students in them. You're always going to have to add a list of students, and you're always going to want to be able to remove people from that list, and you're always going to want to be able to filter them somehow. This is just an inline if statement. It's no different from saying if, open and close parentheses, put your condition in, and then open and close curly braces and write it all out. It's the exact same thing. I just wanted to see if I could do it, because it's fun that way. That's what makes programming fun, not following someone else's instructions, but just like, every time you come across a piece of code that you know how to do, try to make it a little bit more complicated to see if you don't know how to do it, or see if you can break it in some way. Like, I might as well just show you another way of doing it. So, like, if I wrote the same function again, but I wrote it with, and instead of students, I put in studs, because you can write whatever you want. It's just the variable that the filter method is going to be passing in to say, hey, this is the value I'm on right now, because remember, filter just goes through every index in the array, because it's built into array objects, as I keep repeating. So this one I'm going to filter based on, and I'll write this one the different way. Return true, because we know for sure we're going to want it to return something, and the only thing that filter takes is true or false in order to know whether to add it to the output list or not. And the output list I'm just calling old, so I might as well use this one for the age. Studs.age is greater than, let's say 100. I think I got, or let's say 80, because that'll give 2 people. Oh no, because I removed Karen. Copy. I'm going to add Karen back because I need somebody who's old. Oh, I could have just changed my age. Whatever. So this is going to return a filter, which is going to filter by this function. This function is going to check if age is greater than 80, then return true. And all other cases, return false, meaning don't add the current item, which is the variable of stud, to the list of old, which is our output list. So when we hit console.log old, we should get a new list, and this time line 168 is our new list of old, which we console log out on line 168, and that list is going to be Jordan with a power level of 530 and Karen with a power level of 81. Karen dope. So, yeah, I'm going to get blasted for that by somebody. We'll call her dope, as in French. Dope. Okay, so now that we've gotten used to classes a bit, let's make our complicated class. That's going to be that tree structure I talked about before. I've been pussyfooting around it, so let's just dive in. So what do I need? A company name. Maybe I can do that later. First, I need a company class, I need an employee class, and holidays. There's some separate variables I'm going to want to track in holidays, like vacation days taken and the total vacation days, and then I'm going to calculate how many they have left. I mean, could just obviously hand enter it because it's not that complicated mathematically, but this is going to help. This is what I'm doing for practice. This is why I'm doing this video, is for practicing making classes and using getters and setters and methods, because it's different between the different methods of doing it. Like I could call const company equals class. Yeah. Pretty sure the documentation said I could do that, right? JavaScript class function. There, put me over here so you can actually see. Walk with me through the documentation. Getter setter, class polygon. I thought I saw them. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So you can just define a variable like I did here. Const just means constant. Force of habit with React, you create functions using const usually because you don't want them to change. You want the function to stay the same, but you want the value, the output of that function to change. But either or works. But this is just a key to yourself to know whether or not this variable you're creating may or may not change down the road. But yeah, you can build it just a regular class like that. It looks funny, but you can do it. Let's just do that for our company. Why not? We'll go back to our example here. So, constructor, just like anything else, and we're probably going to be giving our company a name. So I'll just assume that. And this.name equals... See, one way to do it, we did it before where we had like default values so that if nothing's passed in, then it doesn't return an error. It just assigns whatever you put in the arguments list or the parameters for the function. In this case, it's a constructor function, which is like a helper function of the class, which is a constructor or a class function. But I'm going to do this a bit differently because I don't think I've shown you the other way. And I just want to practice those inline if statements now that I mentioned them already. So anything I put in these parentheses, in this case, when there's no function or variable in front of it, all it's going to do is say whether it's true or false. It knows no better. Let me move my head again. So if it's one thing, do one thing, and then colon for doing the other thing. So if the name is there, just set it to name, and if it's not there, set it to no name provided. But we're going to give it a name when we build it, but it's just to see things looking a little bit differently. I'm going to have an object with my employees in it. Maybe I'll call that employees, because there will be several of them. And positions, maybe? I'll deal with that later. Probably want to give them positions, but I'm not sure if I want to store the positions of inside the employees or if I want to store the positions as in like available positions to, yeah, I guess the company's going to have available positions, so I might as well use that. And I'll make that an array so that there's only a limited type set of positions available. So there's like a sales position, an office or admin position, and then there's me, the big CEO, the executive chief, and the executive will have their own, and maybe we'll play around with it too down the road, like have the salary functions compute salaries differently based on the positions they're in, for example, because, you know, I don't think I'll get into that in this episode because I'm already starting to get a bit tired and I still got a lot of work to do here. So we'll need a getter function, and that will be to compute the number of employees, I guess, just to have something for it to do. Let's call it get number of employees. Yeah. Oops. And I'm just going to return a method that I haven't written yet. So calc employee num. And then I want to make sure I don't typo. So I'm going to create a method using the calc employee num thing here, because I know that I'm going to use it. And I'm just going to return this dot count employees dot length. Not count, just employees. Yeah, that's not right. So remember, every object that we give it has a primitive object date. Let me rephrase that. Every object that we create has some primitive methods that are attached to it. And I keep drilling this over and over again, but it's really to help you in situations like this to remember, like, oh yeah, everything has a length. So if I want to just test how this is working out, and I want to know how many employees I got, employee num or whatever, so I want to practice using a getter function to call my method. Practice using a getter function to call my method. I can create a function that does practically nothing except for call a property on my employees object to remind myself, hey, employees have length, even though I didn't specify that property. It just comes with it, just fresh out of the box. And you know what, for brevity's sake, I think that's good enough, because I'm not going to be doing much with the company. I'm just going to build one and then start adding employees to it. So I need actually, I might need employee IDs. Actually, that'll be a good place to do the generator function, I think. So a generator function, I guess we could look at the documentation for that too. Just briefly, generator function. So a generator function is a function that kind of like sits up, open, and idle for a while, to the best of my understanding. It's a special type of function that doesn't really finish executing. So it usually I just use it for creating like ID numbers or running through a loop that's an infinite loop, but it's a type of function that, because you can let it sit and hang, it doesn't actually have to finish running its loop. If you try and do an infinite loop with any other type of function, and that includes the for loops, the while loops, or I'm missing one, or like a for each or a method or something that iterates through. If you make something loop infinitely, it'll block up the thread, and then the entire computer will just, well, not the whole computer, the whole browser will hang. It's not gonna finish, and that means the rest of your code won't run. But a generator function, you can let it hang using a yield keyword. And, well, maybe I'll get to that later, because I could probably make an ID generator with it, but if you start trying to do too many things at once, you lose track of the next thing you're going to do. And since I've already got this fresh in my mind, let's just make our employees just trying to think of the order, because I'm going to have to put persons inside of employees and then employees inside of... and then my employees inside of my company. So I think I need employees then before I need a company? Let's try it. Actually, first, let's just create a company. Before we get ahead of ourselves, let's make sure this works. So let abcco equal new company. And the company is expecting a name, so I'm going to call it abcco. And as always, our faithful, trusty console log abcco. And running that should tell me I have no errors. I've created a company object. It's expecting some employees. There are no employees left, but look, we've got our prototypes for an object, because I explicitly built this function to build in a property that provides an object as well. And that's how we can get this length. So I can actually... we can run that. abcco dot... we're using a getter, so the getter should just say number of employees. Uncaught reference. Calc employee num not defined. Calc employee num. Employees dot line. Oh, right, it's not defined because there's nothing in there. I bet. Random value. I bet it just needs something in there for it to, no. Get number of employees as number of employees reference. So I'm going to see if it'll work on an array and not an object to see if maybe it's something finicky with the language or if it's just me. No, it's definitely me. Good. This is practice. So I'm going to uncomment that again because that's not the issue. So let's step through this. My company is a class and I'm creating a new company. It takes in a name. So I give it a name. The name goes here. If it has no name provided, like if I just say x equals new company and I don't give it anything and then I give it x, it's going to say no name provided because that's the other option to this is this truth statement. And truth in this case just means does it have any value whatsoever. So this is just shorthand. The question mark says that this is our shorthand if, and the colon in this case, specifically in this case because I use this question mark, says either this is the output result or this is the output result. It's called an inline if. Inline if statement, if you want to look it up later. But why this isn't working is beyond me. It should say a length of 0. That's what I'm expecting. So when I build this company class, and then when I build a company, it should build this number of employees, get number of employees, calculate employee num, calculate calc employee num. It should just return this, the length. Why? Console.log this.employees.length. Will that work? abcco. So calc employee num is not defined. Number of employees as number of employees, class is live. Oh, there we go. Man, I'm gonna need to fast forward this. I bet you it's because I didn't call this properly. See, with a method, the function doesn't exist on its own globally. So the only way I can call this is if I'm referencing the object first. And when I had it before, I wasn't referencing the object at all. Now I am, and it gets undefined, which is similar to what I'm looking for, but not exactly. Let's see if I put test value. Now I should get 1. No, still undefined. 182. I thought I figured it out, but I hadn't. Oh, that's this line. Nah. Sneh. Sneh. If anybody's seen The Odd Couple, sneh. Calculate number of employees should return that, and that should return that, and this dot employees dot length. I'm just going to create an object here quickly and see what I'm expecting to get when I put in some test values, because maybe my expectations are just off. Console log len should return on line 71 a 0. Dot length. Undefined. Test. So len dot length. So there we go. Learn something live. Apparently object lengths are there, but they're not there. Like they exist. If you look them up and check the properties from the object, it should have its own length. I thought it had its own length. Prototype of all objects. Oh, there you go. So contrary to my belief, there is no length structure for class objects, but there is for regular objects. See, you learn something every day. Basically what I'm checking here is inside the prototype for what I've created, the JavaScript class is, remember I said I wasn't sure if they're exactly different or they're exactly the same, building objects and building classes, but apparently the length is set to the number of keys, which is what I was expecting, but that means that having no keys should be a length of 0, in my opinion. But when I tried that, it didn't seem to like it. Line 171, it wouldn't even give me the len object to inspect and investigate. It's like nothing exists. Even though it exists, it doesn't really quite exist. So anyway, interesting point of note, totally side tangent, but do love to learn things. So now you've learned something, hopefully. Maybe you're just as confused as I am. But at any rate, what was I doing with this? So I really don't want to confuse things. Maybe I'll just get rid of these. Yeah, I'm just going to get rid of them. Because that's going to keep distracting me. If not you, then me. It's not you, it's me. Okay, so what do we need for our company? We need employees. So I'm going to stick to practicing this way just for now, because this seems to be the method I keep having trouble with. Not method like method, not like function method, but method like process method. Person A, they're going to have a pay. I want to put their holidays in an object. So maybe I'll make another class for the object for hired on date. I could do an ID, maybe I'll do that later. What's really important is this one, and this one, because this I'm going to make a separate class to create an object that stores our holidays. So if you've got 2 weeks a year of holidays, that's like 10 days, and if you used up 3 of them, rather than just handwriting it in how many days you've got left, because that's tedious, and for data entry it's pointless because you have all the information you need from just total days and total days taken. So what I'm going to do then is, I'm going to make a class for my holidays, because I think that'll make the most sense. So I'll do it right above the employees here so it's easier to see, and if it doesn't like the order of things, then it'll remind me later. It'll give me an error or something and say, hey, you haven't defined this yet, you can't call it, but I think we'll be okay. So I'm going to build a simple constructor, and I don't want to get too into... so calculate vacation days total. This dot days taken equals A, and this dot total days equals B. Good enough. I'm just going to have to remember that the first one is the number of days taken, and the second number I input is number of total days. Obviously, if you're doing this properly, you'd be a bit more explicit with your definitions, but I'm just going to run through this one because this is practice for the rest of my application. I guess I can call it that now. Now that I'm building functionality into this, it's basically an application, right? Essentially, more or less. So if I get it, then I also have to create the calc days remaining method, and I'm using this so it will actually call it this time just like I want it to. I need a temporary variable for just for the date, days taken minus, no, other way around. Total days minus days taken equals the days remaining. And And again, I have to pull it from only this object. I don't want it to pull from every other object, but... And then I'm just going to use a string here of text so that I have... So I have something just in words. It's not just a number that pops out that I can't remember. Oh, is that number remaining? Number taken? This way, when I console log my calculated days taken, I'm basically just going to be using days remaining as if I had written like this dot days remaining equals total days minus taken days. But the thing is, you can't do this calculation inside of a constructor. That's why we have to do it this other convoluted way, and that's what always trips me up. And I find just practicing things over and over and over again is the best way to learn them, because sometimes things don't make sense. You just have to deal with what you got. So yeah, that's my holiday object. I'm going to create an object that does holidays, so now I can plop an object directly in there without having to build it every time. So that was nice and quick. Now what do I need? I need this stuff. So I'm going to need a way to specify which person this is, because I'm going to dump a person inside of the employees class. And the class is going to have like things like salary and pay. I think that's what I put down here, right? Yeah, so I'm going to need inside of my employees class, I'm going to be defining unique persons, salaries, and holidays. So person is definitely going to be there. Persona is the variable I chose to use here, like person A, persona, I guess. Makes sense to me. We're going to do the same syntax we did before. It's like an error check to make sure that we actually have a value. So if it's there, assign this dot person to whatever person object I give it, and this person object will be from our other constructor. Where is it? Classroom. There it is. From our person constructor. So all of these things will be included inside of this one value inside of employees. So if you'll remember what we've been going through, every time we do this, we're creating a object, which is one of these. X equals something in curly braces with key value pairs. Pairs of keys and values. So this thing will be an object that comes back. And no person objects. Data found. So this will only pop up if we don't give it a proper person for, not even a proper one, just any person. If we don't give it any values whatsoever, it's just, yeah, let's use another method, or no, let's use a built-in function for salary, or pay, or whatever we want to call it. I'm going to call it salary. And this is going to equal pay, which is the variable up here. I'm just changing the name to help. This is what you'll normally do in practice, not reuse the word. But some people do just because it's easier to trace them. But then I find it more difficult if you've got an error in your code or something, or if somebody else has to read it. So I want to parse whatever I get as an integer. So what I'm doing, this is just another one of those primitive built-in functions to JavaScript. It changes a string into an integer. So it parses the string into an integer. It's sort of similar to what we did before with that JSON. Actually, I might as well just show you. JSON.stringify. So remember, we could turn numbers into text by using JSON.stringify. And then I'm passing this whole function, the text of the number I give it, and then converting that back to a number. Hopefully this doesn't screw things up. Maybe I should test this before, right? I keep going off on these tangents, but that's literally the whole point of me doing these videos, is figuring out, hey, can I do that? Hey, can I do that? Hey, can I do that? So console.log z control pay is not defined. Oh yeah, that's right. Just for now, I want to see if this other thing works. And I'm going to give it a string value of 15. Not a number. Oh no, I got to stringify 15. And what do I want? Type of. number. Cool. So if I give it a string, so what I'm doing here is I'm parsing a string into an integer and then checking the type of it afterwards. So if I give it a string, it should just straight up give me a number because I've done the parse int to it, right? But if I do type of 15, which is literally the same thing because it's just a reference to the other thing, it tells me the type of this one is a string. So type of doesn't always work because if it's an object, then it just says object. So if it's an array or a data object, it's not helpful at all. But if you're trying to check like why your code's not working properly, or like if you're doing math to an index or something like that, and it's not counting up properly, usually it's because it's a string and you're trying to use math on a string. In this case, I created a number, which 15 is a number, right? Type of Z number. And I use that JSON built in, and stringify is just a weird way of saying turn this into a string, and then really uselessly I pass the string of the number back into a number. So turn a number into a string and then turn it back into a number and then check its type. Yeah. Let's forget we even did that. Tangent aside, let's move on. Where were we? Class of employees, we have instructors, parse int, stringify our pay. I'm just going to say parse int, because if it's already a number, it'll give us a number, and if it's not a number, let's do that. Let's do that. So if type of pay equals number, and again, maybe I should test this out before I throw it in the code. Sorry for all the back and forth, it's just, I think this is really helpful to learn how programming works, because like I said in prior videos, a lot of people just think that people write code and it's just, you sit down, start typing, and then you're done. But most of it is just moving around blocks of code. Syntax error. Right, because I have to give it two options. Failed test. Type of pay, but I didn't give pay. So I'm going to make a string of a number, and I'm going to check, is that type of equal a number? No, and that's because number is probably going to return the string value number, right? Failed test. Now if I take off these, uncaught pay is not defined. Ah, crap. I keep doing this. Okay, let's do this. Let another TMP equal the text string of 15. And then another, that way I only have to change it in one spot instead of like keep going back and forth. Another TMP, failed test number. Okay, so that fails the test, and then when I take off the quotations, gives me 15. That's not what I wanted. Well, I mean, it's what I wrote, but it wasn't what I was hoping for. But yeah, so it did work though. Even though I've got the parse int there, it looks like I'm fixing it myself, but I'm actually not, because it only shows me this result if it's already a number. So yeah, so 15 comes up. So I could just do type of here, and that shows up as number. So the weird thing is, like, if I just write regular number in here, it's looking for the word number as if this was a variable that I had wrote somewhere else. Like as if I wrote here, let number equal 15. But the built-in, I just know this from having programmed, the built-in is called number with a capital N, and that's a reserved keyword. That's why it highlights again. And I wonder if I need... yeah, see, that doesn't work. Maybe equals equals? Oh, that's because I renamed it. Duh. Another TMP. So fails the test. double equals fails the test. But I guess the output result of the type of, I don't know, that's not even a function though, because functions need this, so I don't know what that's called. Type of is like a built-in that tells you what type of, what the data type is, right? And what is outputting when I console log it is number as in a string of text. So what if I did type of? Yeah, I'm gonna try that. What if I console.log, no, what am I doing? Type of another TMP would give me number. So what's the type of type of? That should be a string. Ah, there you go. See, again, we learned something cool. So hopefully you're having fun with me here, but basically what I'm saying, like the answer, the outcome of type of, checking the type of this, in order to do this comparison, I need to know what type of response this is going to give me so that I can compare it to something that is comparative, if that makes sense. So in other words, when I say type of, it's going to tell me string or number, but that answer itself is a string of text, and that string of text is literally number or literally string. So when I check type of another temp, that's how I know the result of a type of is a string. And again, that literal problem isn't really useful, but what's important to notice is like the idea of doing a type of a type of to see what the outcome is as a way of figuring out this problem here, which is a very real problem, right? I'm trying to compare this variable that I get to either a string or a number, and I have to know how to compare it to something. And the only way I could know that is if I put these quotations around it, because the result of a type of is a string. So if type of pay is equal to number, it can't be a variable, it can't be an object, it can't be the built-in primitive with the capital N, it has to be the string number, the thing that this outputs. That's what I'm checking for. So interesting to note. But anyway, so if this type, basically all we're saying is if this whole block is true, right? So if this type is of type number, then I can just say pay. Then it's already in the format we want, but if it's not of type number, then it's probably a string, and if it's not a string, it's going to be like an array or an object data type, and I don't think I have the energy or time to convert an object or do like check testing on objects and arrays to convert them into strings, because it just shouldn't happen. The point of building these classes is that doesn't happen, because you're defining specifically what data builds these objects, and if there's an error, hopefully that error will present itself long before this ever gets into production. So with employees, what do I need? I need salary and holidays. I'm going to use that holiday object, that factory function thingy. Yeah, so holiday object is what I'm going to pass into it. Now when I pass into it, I'm going to say something like what am I going to say? Emp ID 0091 blah blah blah, or something like that. And that's going to equal a new employee. Again, this is just a comment because I want to visually see what the final result's going to look like, so I have a better idea of how to structure this thing. So my new employee is going to take a person. So the first thing that goes in here is employees with an S. That's important. So first thing that goes in there is going to be a new person, and then I've got all the blah 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 for my person details. Second thing that goes in there is pay, and that's just a number, so I can just write $20 an hour, let's say. So the next thing that goes in here is my holiday object, and that's going to have days taken, total days, and it's going to have days remaining. Because remember, get is a function that adds itself to this construction, but like after this is initialized and created, it creates the days remaining. property, and that property is going to be evaluated by calling its own method. And its own method is written right here, which takes the now that it's running, it's got these properties to draw from to I'm going to have to do this a bit different actually. Because now that we're talking about numbers and text types, remember I was saying mixing numbers and text, no worky. So first I'm going to have to do the math in these parentheses, and then using a plus and a string converts the whole thing to a string after the fact. That's similar to what we were talking about with those arrays when we had the index of 2 plus 1 as text becoming 21 instead of 3. But yeah, so our holiday object's going to create this thing with our days in it. So that'll be built for us. We don't really have to think about it right now. And then I'll just have like a start date for hired on date. I wonder, should we use that generator function too? No, it's too late. So, employee, we're going to get vacation. And in that get vacation, it's just going to return this dot calculate vacation as a method I haven't written yet. So I should write that method, calc vacation. And calc vacation should be straightforward, but maybe I'm going to want to worry about data types on this one too. So how do I try and do it all in one line just to see if we can juggle things around a little bit. So it'll be our holidays total days minus total days minus days taken. Oh, but I've already got this object. Why don't I just use days remaining? Because that's all done for me. And if I want this to be a number, I can just say, well, no matter what you do with this, just parse int it. So I don't have to do all that in here. I can just call this dot holidays dot days remaining. Yeah, because this will create a property because it's a get. Instead of being a method and calling it with the parentheses, I just need to call the property because the property gets evaluated and calculated with the get. That should work. Yeah, so now our I don't need ABC Co, just call it ABC. And then the name can be ABC Company because that'll just be a lot easier to reason through. Now, I need to create a holiday object so that I can pass it in when I do yeah, I'm going to have to make a holiday object before I can create an employee because that employee is going to need... Well, no, I can do it while I'm creating an employee, actually. Yeah, so let's see if we got any errors first. First things first. Do we have any errors? No. Line 155 and 168, you are going to distract me. So, comment... distracted by a list of women. Figures. And distracted by old. Okay, so to start things off, now that we've got a clean slate, I'm going to create a test company. And I'm going to say equals new company. Call it Chris Corp. And I'm going to need a test... No, I've got some people. I've got some persons already, right? That I didn't comment them out. Nah, I still got people. Okay, so new class, and I think I have Chris up here too. Beautiful. So I've got 4 potential employees. What is it? Chris, Janice, Jordan, and Karen. persons. Chris, Janice, Jordan. Oh, and I think I created a Megan too. I think I still have a Megan. That should be plenty of people. I really want to put the ID in there though. You know, just for kicks. Oops, not here. That's our arbitrary function. Star ID generator. I'm just going to create a generator function to give you an idea of how the thing works. You initialize something once. You can run an infinite loop that would otherwise crash the system, but because you're using this reserved keyword yield, it's basically going to hang up the infinite loop. It'll let it hang, set it aside, and then let us do something else, and then come back to it later. And this is going to give us a unique number every time we call the function, as opposed to infinitely running or always producing the same number. I can initialize it once and just leave it open and keep reusing it after. Not terribly useful in this case, but I do want to show you the increment options, because usually I've been doing the ++ ID, but another way of incrementing is using or ID++. It means that it equals itself +1 with an increment, whereas in this case I'm doing it equals the increment and then the ID. So this equals ID after it's done the increment, whereas ++ after the ID would be it equals ID, and then before you call ID again, make sure that the increment has been applied. But just so that our text or our code examples and stuff like that match, or just show us a bunch of all of our different options. And then I need a function. Let's const get ID. Let's just call it get ID. Const get ID equals, I'll use an arrow function in this case. I'm going to need a temporary store of value, and let's use this same idea as what we're doing with our other generator, our other what do you call it, class thingies, object factories. Same thing we're doing with functions that create objects. And then we had the primitives where we said new array, and we could create an array. You could do the same thing with string. I think you could probably do it with number too. Oh my god. Now I have to try that. Console log new number, and then they usually take something, so let's just put that in. Yeah, see, it actually gives you a number object with a prototype. That's funny. And it comes with a constructor and even some useful methods. So good to know. You can make a new number if you choose to in JavaScript. Like, you can build a new number. It'll look like every other number, but yeah, you're building it. So I'm gonna need like an ID, so like some IDs, and I'm going to make that equal to our generator function, not the output, but or not the function itself, but the output of this function. And remember, once this is called, this star is like a key decorator that tells our JavaScript compiler that this function that we're writing is going to be a generator function, which gives it access to this yield, and that's what's going to prevent our infinite loop, because otherwise while true is just always true, unless you said like, even then you can't. Well, you could you could change the prototype value of true and false. You could change the Boolean prototype to but that's getting way too deep into the reads here. Focus. Okay, so some IDs with our ID generator function. And then in here, I can say some IDs coming from a string, but because I'm using the generator, I have to use the .next, and .next is basically going to say run this, or continue running the function that you've already started. So it's going to start from here. It's going to start, because this loop is infinite and it's already been called once, so ID only gets set to 0 once, and then for the rest of all of time, it's going to be stuck in here. And then when it hits yield, it stops and waits to be called again until you hit that next again. So when I hit next, it's going to give me an object though, because I think it gives me like a previous value too, but I don't want the previous value, I just want the current one. And that way I'm always going to be generating a new ID. It'll never be an ID that's been used before, because every time this code is run, this yield explicitly increments the ID variable that started at 0. And I'm going to put this as a string because I want to pad it, and there's a method to pad it, like simply, but I'm just going to do it the brutal hands-on way. And I'm going to give a size to my ID, so I know how many digits I want, and then I'm just going to write a simple loop. Let len... Oh, I can't use let. Let lem. Lem works. So let lem equal... Or no, this time we're going to iterate backwards. We always iterate forwards. I want to show you some different ways of doing things. So lem dot length... No. tmp dot length. And if lem is greater than... How am I doing this? Okay, the length of my string is lem. So if lem is greater than 0... No, I want to compare it to the size, because I only want to do this loop as so long as the size isn't filled out. So what I'm doing, if I only get one number and I want a 10-digit number, I only want to loop 9 times. So as long as lem is bigger than the size, then do a lem plus plus. Yeah, because TMP length is going to be 1 in the first case. So that means lem is 1, and then as long as 1 is bigger than the size, no, less than the size, because the size is what I want to fill out too. So I'm going to run through this loop and just output plus equals a 0. Because it's a string, so I can just add zeros onto the end of a string by saying the string equals itself plus a 0 and return output when I'm done. Because that'll sort of, yeah, that'll sum everything up. And then I can set the ID to my function. My unique ID function. I guess that means in my class I have to, not classroom, my other class. Employee ID? Yeah. I just keep looking back and referring to the structure on there. Yeah, so I've got ID in here. Basically, I just need to say this dot ID equals ID. But I should call it something different, but I won't. Yeah, so I've got get vacation, calculate my vacation days remaining, and it does that based on the holiday object. And I don't want test values in here because I'm going to populate this with my employees. And the reason why I'm using an object here instead of an array is because I'm actually, we did the index of to find out the index of an array containing a certain value. This time I'm going to use an object and we're going to look up the key. That's why I put this in here intentionally, just to remind myself to do that. But I'm just trying to make sure we have all the pieces we need. So we've got a company creator, we've got a holiday object creator, we've got an employee creator, and we've got persons already created. So we should be able to just like start throwing people together. So Chris Corp takes, back to where we were starting, just takes a name and then it creates one. So that's all that. Then test company dot, where are we going to assign these? I'm just trying to figure out how I want to approach this, because I think the order matters with classes. That's another one of the finicky things. If you call a class that requires another class, it's not going to work. That's where the extends keyword comes in, but you know, I'm not going to get into that today because this is already like 2 hours, so I think I'm pretty much done. I'm just going to quickly type some stuff together, and yeah, maybe I'll pause the video and I'll type a bunch of just random data so that we have an output to look at. And I'll be right back. And I'm back, and I just realized I was going on and on after I typed a whole bunch of stuff here while I was on pause, and then I realized that I started going into building it again. I was just going to type in some data objects for our example, but as soon as I put in a prototype test of our holidays and it worked right away, I got a little bit excited. So I kept going with it, but I guess there's really no reason to see me type it all out. We can follow it through because none of this is different from what we've already done before. So in our test holiday object, we just said like new holiday object. And up here in holiday object, we said give it two things. The first item you give it is going to be the days taken. Second item you give it is the total days. So days taken, total day. Oh, I did these backwards. Hold on. Days taken, total days. And then test employee, new employee, test person. So I used this person up here as the input for my employee, which is what we demanded. Text editor is always trying to help you out. And then 25 is the pay, the rate of pay, which we got here. Then our holiday object was this. So test holidays is this object I just created, and this object says days taken, total days. I decided to put in like a hired date, and then I've got my get ID, which is going to give the ID, and then where was I? Yeah, and then the ID, and then that just closes out the new employee. So then I created some new persons, just added some new generic info, made another employee using that person's info, their new rate of pay, and then I threw in create the object just because, you know, what is it? Total days and days taken. Did I do all of these backwards? I guess I could just reverse these numbers. Total days, days taken is A. Days taken is A. Days taken is A. Yeah, so I'll just say 7 and 10. Sorry, I was rushing, obviously. Here's another way of doing it. Instead of using the object builder, the class of holiday object, I just explicitly wrote. So you can see how you can like do a manual override of your own application if you want by handwriting in an object, because anything between these commas is completely valid entry. And notice for my IDs, I can just use this generator over and over again to create a new number, and it's never going to produce the same number, because the only way for it to leave that code is if it increments the ID number, and it never actually finishes the code because we're yielding. We're not returning, we're just yielding a value. The yield leaves that infinite loop wide open, and it never gets reinitialized to 0, so the number is always going to be different. Either the line of code runs and it yields, or it doesn't run and it never finishes and spits out a value, and either way we're fine. And with that, I think we should be all good to go. Syntax error. Uh-oh, 234. Let company equal this. Where's my syntax error? Unexpected identifier. let. That's because company just has a dot here. Oh, and I did this twice. Ha! Okay, so new company, refresh, employee is not defined. Where am I calling it? Employees, right? Yeah. So I've got a class of employees, and I probably did that over and over and over and over and over again. Yikes. So test employee is a variable, so I don't want to change that one. Oh, that was the other thing. I'm using a variable inside of these brackets here because this object, remember the square brackets on objects are to define a key, and without using the quotation marks, what I'm doing is I'm saying the full name, which is that get method that is grabbed from the first and the last name, concatenated together, and then spit out in our where is it? Our employee structure here. No, that's not where it is. Persons, that's where it is. So way up here in persons, remember full name, we actually computed it. We didn't explicitly define it in here because it's just first name and last name. But we don't have access to these until after the constructor runs, so we have to use a get function, and the get function just returns its own self, but the method on itself. And the method on itself, all it does is add those two names together. So I'm using that value, that output, that result to call the key for this object and explicitly define that key so that when I look inside of my company, the people's names are actually the keys, and it'll just make everything quicker and easier to look up like down the road if you were gonna start using this code like in practice. And then just for fun, I did another one that was all kind of like just everything using the new keyword. So I made a new employee, made a new person out of the new employee, etc., etc. And then I just used my get ID again because it, nothing else to do with it. But why isn't this should be working now? Nope, holiday object is not defined. 217. Where did I go? This.holidays equals holiday object. Try this again. Employee 250. Probably the same problem as before. Yeah, new employees, not employee. Holiday object, employees. Employees. Oh, caught one. Oh, caught one. Any more? No. And booyah. So we've got our... Which one is this? Line 264. This one here. Let's just take out employees and just use our test company. So, our company is comprised of employees, and I didn't actually use the positions. I'm too tired. It's been too long enough video. But we've got Alice, which is an actual, like, full-on, this is the key. If I wanted to look up the data object itself, if I wanted to call it, I could just use the person's name, because that unique name is going to be the unique key. This is probably bad practice in real life, because you could get two people with exactly the same name, or with different spelling. It would be hard to pull up the person, but then you could just look them up by ID instead. That's sort of the point of having the ID, is you need some kind of unique identifier. But at the same time, if you did have two people with the same name, you could always just run a recursive function that loops through an array. So if you find out that the key already exists, you just convert that that property into an array, and then you have a function check to see if it's an array and run recursively through every element in the array for any type of, there's a whole bunch of roundabout ways of approaching and solving problems. So again, this isn't the best way to do anything. I certainly don't recommend going through all of this, and I certainly don't recommend doing any of this, because this is impossible for people to read or comprehend or understand what's happening. But you can. It's neat that you can. And if you want to learn a programming language, the best thing you can do is figure out exactly the limits that you can push that you can push the language and your understanding of the language, because it's not really the language doing anything crazy here. It's literally just doing all the things it told us it could do right from the beginning. It takes a creativity of thought and just like some exploratory, just soul searching in code to see what type of creative solutions you can come up with. And like we did before, halfway through there, when we were trying to do like type of, like that kind of thing. It's not that it's useful or anything. It's just that knowing how you can manipulate the language itself helps you solve problems in other ways, because you can use the idea of type of to figure out a comparison to type of, or why an if statement's not working, or you can check a data object's structure if you didn't use the classes, or maybe you did use the classes and your getter is not working because it's not called at the right time, or maybe what did we do before? We had we put a global up here, right? And I tried to use this, but you can't use this up here. You can only use it inside the constructor and inside the methods. And then if you don't use it inside the methods, it like completely shits the bed and has no idea what to do. But up here, you're not even allowed to use this. So just things like that. I mean, you figure that out just by trial and error and practice. That's what code is. It's just a lot of practice. But the thing it does for your brain is it makes you think, because you're thinking of chunks of words as objects, and you're thinking of data types instead of just variables, and you're thinking of variables instead of just values. And a value could be anything. Instead of a value being an explicit, like a number or a string of text, you now know that a value can also be a function that returns a string of text or returns a number, or it can return an object that has a method attached to it that computes itself and then spits out the result from that. So it's just infinitely interesting, all the different things that we can play around with and figure out. And yeah, hopefully you find it as interesting as I do. Here's that info function that we called up here. Where was it? Person? Yeah. That's that info function where we said get info. Info becomes a property. How does it know what the property is? It calls a method. What's that method? The method is this, and it returns an array. Here's our array. Alice, Bob. That was Alice's first name, Alice's last name, gender, place, location, or whatever. That was all this. So yeah. Hopefully you find that interesting. That's going to wrap up our use of functions, I think. I'm not going to get too much into generators because I honestly still need to study them. I don't know them very well. I don't use them very often. I'm not sure that they even are used very often. The class structure, it's very handy. I tried briefly to use the extends to encapsulate persons and employees, the employees in the companies, because a person can exist without an employer. Like, a person can exist without being an employee, but an employee can't exist without being in a company. So what we could have done was had employees, maybe it'll just work. I should just try it since we're in here. Employees extends company. I should just see if this works. No, of course not. So, that's because I didn't, I guess that's one of the things worth noting is that if you're going to extend a class into it from, like, if I wanted to, okay, class employees, what is it? It's an extension of company. So if I'm going to extend company, I have to super this or something like that. Call the super constructor. Can't remember even how I do this. Super? Okay. But doing this just means that now every object I create, even if I don't define the employees, it's the employees is a subclass of company now, having extended it, and this super is a built-in function that takes the superseding structure of company and incorporates it into employees, just so there aren't any memory address conflicts or back-end low-level stuff like that. But it's sort of beyond me. Still working on it, still practicing. But if you're going to do React web development or app development or anything like this, all web development is going to use some of this, almost. I mean, you can make apps in Python and stuff, but the easiest way to get started is just to use the JavaScript framework. Even though this looks complicated, this is nothing compared to the complication you'll find from other languages. There are different things that are more simple in other languages, like you don't run into the same problems in different languages generally, because each language is sort of, the differences between the languages is what makes them more proficient at one task over another. And the thing that makes JavaScript proficient is its ability to be mished and mashed around and used in any type of application that you want. It's not at all a good programming language to write an operating system like Windows or Linux in. You'd never like write code in this. But the reason why we write web apps in it is because over all the years of using the internet, web browsers have so refined JavaScript that it's actually a really efficient engine, despite the fact that it's a single-threaded workhorse. So that should be good for now, though. I hope you enjoy the content. Like I said, if you do, like, share, and subscribe. We're not asking for money or anything like that. Just open source free education and useful tools, hopefully, for you to carry through. And more importantly, philosophically, the ability to think through deconstructing problems the way nature intended. So have a good one. Talk to you later. Enjoy. Bye.